People misunderstand auto-resolve to the point where other tips videos suggest that you don't use it to fight your battles. But this is a mistake. People think that the bar at the top is an indication of your fight success, but it isn't. The bar at the top indicates the projected amount of lives taken. The biggest bar suggests that that army will have the most kills. However, this doesn't always mean that the fight is won. Morale has a much bigger impact on the overall end result than it otherwise appears. Morale matters because it means your army can lose lots of soldiers before giving up. This means even if your army is projected to take a lot of casualties, if it has high morale, there's a strong chance it will still win. On a similar note, if your army suffers a morale crisis, like losing its general, then its morale will be shot and your troops will desert. Though do remember that morale works both ways. Taking out the enemy general is often a quick and easy way to shift the balance of power in your direction. I have 4 sets of peasants, each with only 1 experience. I have them attack this army here, and you can see that the battle meter says I'm almost certainly going to lose. So I auto-resolve, and there I actually won. It doesn't make sense until you factor in the idea of morale. They killed 78 of my soldiers, which means my army went down by 15%. I only killed 42 people in their army, but their army went down from 104 to 58. This means 55% of their army is now dead. Thanks to this, during the battle, their army lost morale and fled. Meaning that, despite the original indicator saying that I was going to lose more soldiers, it was never going to be enough to demoralize my army. They were always going to win. How does command skill affect an auto-resolve outcome? Morale has the biggest effect on auto-resolve outcomes. Command has the second biggest effect, but it's tied with the effect of having a large army. Nevertheless, command ranking does have an effect on auto-resolve success. Here is an example. I'm going to take on this general who only has 1 command star, but he does offer 2 morale to his soldiers, which is important, and thanks to this trait, he is pretty tricky to kill. He is also very experienced, as you can see from the small silver experience mark down here. My general has 2 command stars and 5 peasant armies, so we should lose this fight quite roundly. The meter at the top says that the enemy has the edge, so here comes the loss. Turns out we won, but in this case it simply demonstrates that luck plays a part in your auto-resolve battles, which is why some people like to save before they auto-resolve their fights. Let's run the test again with the same parameters, and in this case, quite rightly, my army loses with a clear defeat. This time, everything is the same except that my general has 7 points in command. The meter at the top says that the odds are even further against my army, probably because my general doesn't have as many bodyguards as the last one. Yet, I win a clear victory, and this is because my general has 7 command stars, whereas the enemy only has 1. And even though the enemy had better morale, better soldiers, and the battle meter showed that they had the advantage, my band of peasants won because my general was a significantly better commander. When should you fight a battle manually? The first and best reason is if you want to take out their general. Even if you lose the fight, it's possible to take out a very powerful general, or even a faction leader, which gives you a definite advantage during future fights. This is a very lucky find on my part. It is a faction leader on his own. If I auto-resolve the fight, he will lose, but the leader himself may escape. If I fight the battle manually, I can send in the horses and I can make sure the leader is dead before I end the fight. The second best reason is when the odds seem stacked against you, especially in terms of numbers. If you have some very powerful or perhaps experienced troops, you can use your expert tactics to chew up the enemy army bit by bit, or you can take down their leader to demoralize their troops. The third best reason is to make a last stand by whatever means are necessary. This may mean running the enemies around until the clock ticks down, or perhaps even hiding your troops in the woods so that you can ambush the enemy when they walk by. The fourth best reason is because sometimes it's just fun to mash up the enemy when you clearly have a superior army. After all, you bought the game to have some fun, so why not have a little? When you first start a new campaign, there's an easily missable toggle function up here called Modifiers. Click on it and it shows you all the major differences between the old game and the remastered one. Population cost balancing is a great improvement because in the old days when you hired a big gang of peasants, they'd soak up most of your population, but now hiring them has the same effect on your population as hiring regular foot soldiers. The remastered changes also inform you on things that you may not have possibly known, like the End Turn button that displays an alert if you have something in your news feed that the game considers important. It looks like this, and I had absolutely no idea what it meant until until I read the Modifiers menu. You can see there, it tells me my settlement is besieged before it allows me to end my turn. When comparing the old version to the remastered version, the auto-sort and auto-arrange buttons are absolutely amazing. I spent so much time in the previous game trying to merge and rearrange my troops before sending them off to battle, whereas in the remastered version, they do it all for you. Just remember that if you merge your troops, you then lose the ability to quickly rebuild your numbers with retraining. If you need a big army and you are in a city, then merging your units is not the way to go. During the early game, name your cities based on what you want them to do. There are those you use to generate money, some you use to create defensive units, others to generate spies or maybe highly advanced units. Though, with that said, later in the game this does become less necessary. This is because over time your cities will become more advanced, your wars will feature on several fronts, and things like micromanaging become just a little too time-consuming. Rome Remastered has removed the building path and building limit that the old version used to have. See, in the old version, you could pick a certain build path, but then you had to stick to it. This only allowed you to build certain types of building in each city. However, in the remastered version, you can build almost any type of your faction's buildings within any of your cities. You only have to choose which religious buildings that you want. Everything else can be built in any city, just so long as you have the population size and/or the resources. This means the auto-managed construction features are actually very useful and very balanced. As your empire grows, I strongly suggest that you stop micromanaging and you let your cities build themselves. Peasants are a pretty good backup unit. If you are about to be attacked or you are having trouble with rebellious cities, peasants are quick to create, they are cheap, and they offer some degree of military might. The remaster has changed the mechanic. This means that creating peasant fighters will no longer drain your cities of their population as they once did in the original game. You don't have to hold your best troops in your cities. A few peasant armies can easily plump up your military numbers so that your cities do not experience unrest, nor are they completely vulnerable to enemy attacks. Should you chase down the enemy after a battle? If there are enough of them on the field and it is convenient, then yes, chase down the enemies because the more kills your fighters get, the faster they gain experience. Experience adds more defense and attack to your soldiers, which is especially helpful in this case because peasants with experience and armor are technically overpowered considering their low cost and high unit numbers. On that note, if you have a group of peasants, the better their general is, the more powerful they become, especially when it comes to increasing their morale. Enemy economies actually matter in the remastered version. This means that if you cut off their trade routes and trade deals, if you take their capital, if you exterminate and abandon their cities, then their economy will actually suffer. You can start a war of attrition in some cases, damaging the enemy's economy so that they are forced to reduce their army sizes and slow the growth of their cities. As mentioned in the previous tip, the economic destruction of your enemy is actually quite a viable form of attack. From blockading ports to bribing their armies, you can damage the enemy with means other than ground troop attacks. Spies are useful in this regard. Each time you send a spy into an enemy city, it negatively affects public order. On the matter of spies, adding them to your army will increase its viewing range quite dramatically. Here is my army in the middle of nowhere, I add a spy to my ranks, and look at how far my line of sight now extends. I do suggest that you fiddle with the control settings. On the main menu, in Settings, under Controls, go to the Strategy menu, and instead of pressing Shift-Enter to end the turn, I find it easier to press the numpad Enter button. Then, over to the Battle menu, and I change the Pause button from the letter P to the spacebar. It replaces it for the Quick menu, but I never use the spacebar for the Quick menu. Plus, pressing space to pause just feels more natural during battles. If you mess things up or you forget what you've changed, there's always the reset button down there. Also, after making the changes, don't forget to confirm your choices. Learn to love the Settlements button, especially during the early game when you haven't yet set everything to auto-manage and your towns are still growing. Right-click down here. The reefs on the left mean that there is a general present in those cities, allowing for more direct management, as well as other perks from having your general govern a city. The next symbol is population growth, followed by public order. This symbol here means that something is being built in this town. So, since I want my cities to develop, I click on this one and I build something, and similar for this one. These two here have this symbol, which means some units are being created. I'm only fighting one war, so I don't need that many cities to create new units, at least not yet. If you hover over the icon, you can actually see which units are being built. The other symbol is tax income, and again, you can hover over it. The last symbol is auto-manage. I can click on this one here and set it to auto-manage. At the moment, it is only auto-managing taxes, but I could also have it construct and recruit automatically too. Followers can be moved from general to general, which means you can have your battle-related followers assist your generals in the field, and you can have your economy-related followers stick with your generals in the cities. In the previous game, the original version, these people were called the retinue, and I wouldn't personally suggest that you bother with them. After playing for a few hours, things like micromanaging followers will seem more like a hassle than a gameplay feature. Most coastal areas are safe. In Total War Rome Remastered, the enemies are still terrible at attacking via the sea. This means that your coastal borders are still as safe today as they were in the original game. They will create legions of ships to attack your other seafaring vessels, but will rarely risk sending troops via the sea unless they have no other option. This puts your smaller islands at greater risk. The enemies are forced to attack via the sea, and on your part, it's tricky getting reinforcements to your troops. If the enemy has reinforcements and you do not, try clicking the Fight at Night toggle box, and in some cases, the enemy loses their reinforcements. Though, as you can see here, it works the same for you too. When I fight at night, my reinforcements disappear. Fighting at night will remove the option for reinforcements unless the enemy commander has the Night Fighter ability, in which case his reinforcements will stick around. Fighting at night lowers archer accuracy, which is handy if the enemy has more projectile units than you. I read online that hidden units are more difficult to spot during the night, but I had trouble reliably testing if this was true. The remastered version of Rome Total War has rewritten and limited how Squalor works. This means you can grow your towns into massive cities, and unlike with the original game, you won't need a super expensive army present to keep order. As you can see, this is a fully upgraded and highly populated city, and even though Squalor is at minus 80%, it really isn't causing a problem. Now look at an example of an old version, and you can see how Squalor is a massive problem for an upgraded city. The occupy function is far more useful because your newly occupied and heavily populated cities are less affected by Squalor, which in the previous games was a permanent problem for larger cities. You can move your capital city using this button here. Keep it roughly in the middle of your empire. The closer your cities are to your capital, the less corruption they will experience, which means more profit from your local cities. Public order is also affected by the proximity of your capital. The further away the cities are, the higher their public order penalties. Children will come of age in the city where their father resides, but if their father is in the field, then their children will come of age in the capital. Generals and related leaders will spawn in the capital, and tactically, having them spawn in the middle of your empire helps to keep them safe, and it lowers travel time from each and any of your borders. Be very careful when putting family members on boats. Unless you have a large and unstoppable fleet, there's always a risk of your boats sinking and taking your family members and their armies with them. Though luckily you do need to suffer a complete defeat at sea for your troops to be lost. If you still have one boat floating around after the battle, then your armies are safe. In this case, I lost all of my ships in the fleet, which therefore included losing a huge army of soldiers who were within. You only need to put watchtowers in areas of your own territory where it is dark. Take a look at how I can see almost all of the borders in my territory, here, and across the coast. There are no other units in this area, so their line of sight doesn't factor into this example. All of this area that is lit up, this is how far the city can see. Any enemy units will be spotted, so will merchants and diplomats, and there's a chance that assassins and spies will be spotted too. It is only over here that is in shadow, so I send out a general, and now that I can see the very edge of my territory that used to be in shadow, this is the only place in my territory that needs a watchtower. Now this entire country is completely lit up, meaning that all enemy units will be spotted, and again there's a chance of unveiling spies and assassins too. Sappers are my most favourite siege engine for bringing down walls. Here is an example of them in action so that you can see what I mean. The mission starts and it's not immediately obvious where they are, but if you look over here, it's just these stands right here. These are actually the entrances to tunnels. I send over 3 sets of troops to start digging, and another 2 just in case, the enemy sneaks up on me. The tunnels are just close enough to the advanced wall towers for them to start firing a volley of arrows, but notice, when my troops enter the tunnels and start digging, the towers cannot see them, and so they stop firing, and down come the walls. A lucky side effect in this case was that the troops on the wall cannot reach the tower. This means they're stranded up there, which will make attacking their center square even easier. You can filter your news messages. You go up here, you click on this, and then you select what you do and do not want to know about. There are quite a few to pick through, but I personally find the recruitment report to be a little redundant, especially when you have a large empire. The construction reports also get annoying for the same reason, but it's really up to you. Public order needs to stay above 70%. If it is currently below 70%, you will need to fix it during the next turn. If you do not, then there will be public unrest. A well-functioning city won't have to worry about public unrest if the taxes are being handled automatically. A non-functioning city, i.e. one that has more problem than simply high taxes, will need buildings, governance, and/or reinforcements to restore public order. If a city experiences unrest for too long, it may revolt and become its own rebel nation. Do attach your spies to cities and your own armies. They help to stop assassins, and they help spot enemy spies. They also build up experience traits if they do a good job. Taking them along with your armies is handy for when you need them to nip across and check out an army, or when you want them to look into a settlement. Having them acting independently on the map and keeping track of them all becomes a hassle after a while when you have a massive empire. At least when you keep them with your armies, you know where they are. The same is true of the very valuable assassin unit. Don't keep diplomats with your armies. Keeping spies and assassins with your armies is a good idea, but the same is not true for diplomats. Instead, send your diplomats far and wide. Not only do they explore and expose the map for you, but you can have them set up map sharing and trade deals with all sorts of other factions. Let them build up their experience so that when you really need them for some serious negotiating, you are not relying on a brand new diplomat unit. What does command, influence, and management actually do? Command offers a fighting benefit when auto-resolving battles. It also has an effect on your own units during real-time battles if they are close enough to your general. Influence affects public order when your general is in charge of a city. Influence also generates a larger bodyguard force, making your general even more deadly during a fight. Higher management numbers give bigger income bonuses, but it may also cause unrest because people don't like being taxed for extra money. Take this example here with my faction leader. The same rules apply for any general who runs a city. Now, we can ignore the buffs in public order because this leader also has a lot of influence. But you can see here, on the settlement income page, with the leader present, I get an extra 441 gold, which there is called admin. Without the leader, there is no admin income. On the settlement details page, that 10% of unrest is because of the leader's high management skills. The reason it is not a problem in this case is because of the leader's very high influence rating, which, as you can see up there, is adding a whopping 40% to public order. There are 2 ways to migrate the population. Let's say you want to quickly increase the population in these 3 cities. One method is to have a general govern those cities and only those cities. So I go ahead and I remove my generals from all of my other cities. I then attack this enemy faction over here. I enslave the population. As a result, the slaves are shared equally between each of my governed cities. The second method is to build a bunch of peasant units, send them over to the city you want to plump up, and then disband them while they are garrisoned within. A portion of their number will join that city as a part of the population. If you are playing as one of the Roman factions, you start out as an ally to Rome. However, at some point there will be a civil war, and you will become the enemy. While you are allied, try not to enslave too many towns or cities. Remember in the last tip where I said that only settlements with governors will receive a portion of your slave population? Well, when you are allied with Rome, they too will receive a portion of your slaves. This means that if you run around enslaving enemy cities, you are also adding to the population of Rome. Then, during the civil war, they are going to have a massive number of civilians, which they will quickly turn into soldiers, which will probably then come and run you over. Higher population numbers and higher population growth doesn't mean more unrest. You don't need to keep your population numbers down in the same way that you did with the original game. As your population grows, you should also grow your city, so that it has the buildings required to accommodate so many people. Even the building of a tavern or a temple can keep your city happy without the need to cull the population. You should also grow your army, albeit slightly, to watch over those people and to keep civil unrest at a minimum. Larger cities are best governed by people who have a higher influence number. Notice how public order goes down from 131% to 81% when this governor with 10 influence leaves. Also, and more importantly, when a city grows, you can lower its taxes. If you have thousands of people in your city, you can still turn a fair profit with a middle or lower tax band. Remember, more people equals more taxpayers, which means when you have a very large city, a higher tax rate is often unnecessary. If you are frequently saving, then do it at the beginning of your turn. It is tempting to save after you've made all your moves and you've done all the hard work, but there is very little you can do at that point to change the overall outcome, so what would be the point of loading? With that said, the autosave function saves whenever you start a turn, and quite often whenever you end a turn. So if you are frequently saving, you may actually be wasting your time because the autosave is doing it for you. I am besieging a city and they are attacking because they are emboldened by their huge group of reinforcements. Normally I would fight at night to rule out reinforcements, but I am being attacked, so I don't get the option. They only have a few troops to start with. Their reinforcements are quite a way away. I can quickly nip in and destroy this troop, which causes them to flee. This opens up the door, and as soon as my troops pass the threshold, the gate is considered conquered. I put my general in the centre square to start the countdown. This causes them to hurry along any of their troops to retake the centre square, which will subsequently stop the timer. I could try to bottleneck them near the entrance and perhaps run the timer down, but if my troops start to run away, then I'd pretty much lose my army. So I stick to keeping all of my soldiers in the centre, and as you can see, they are sending their fastest troops into the centre. This means I can overwhelm them bit by bit without my soldiers losing faith and running away. Now comes the tricky bit. They have significantly better troops, and they are all grouped up. However, they have lost both of their generals, and they've suffered more losses than me. The next part doesn't go exactly how I would have liked. I would have preferred to surround the enemy a little more. In addition, I would have also preferred not to send my cavalry up against their speared enemies. Nevertheless, despite my poor attempts at surrounding them, I still win a very decisive victory against overwhelming odds. When it gives the option to chase them down, you should always do it when you are in a situation like this. This is because when they retreat, they have to run back towards the square, which means they are pretty much running into your arms and being slaughtered, therefore allowing your soldiers to gain more experience with only a very tiny risk of injury. If you hold Control, you can click to select multiple single units. Now, if I press Shift and click here, and then I click here, it selects all of these units. This is handy for creating groups more quickly. Holding Control here, I select each unit that carries a siege weapon, and now that they are all selected, I can press the button to have them all drop their siege engines at the same time. You can use Shift and Control, each one after the other, such as here, I use Shift to select this batch, and then I let go of Shift, and I hold Control to select this single unit. Then, with them all selected, I can group them. The enemy AI is smarter in the remastered version. For example, in the old version, I would let one of their siege engines wander up to my gate, I would sally out my troops, destroy it, retreat, and then let them stand outside while the timer runs down. But now, not only is the timer 45 minutes long, rather than the older option of as little as 10 minutes, but as you can see, when I attack the lone siege engine, the enemy AI knows to run out and destroy my troops. Later in the game, as you build more wealth, Diplomats become your secret weapon. It's amazing how many times you can fix a problem by throwing money at it. Bribing a settlement is cheaper than an all-out attack, because don't forget that troops cost you gold to create, and then they cost you gold per turn, whereas a bribe is only a one-time payment. The game is easier if you play to each faction's strengths. It sounds obvious, but take the Julii faction for example. Their skirmishers are their best, most balanced units. Each of these units throws missiles before running in for the charge. This is the method by which you are most likely to succeed with this faction. You could adopt a different approach with horses or perhaps with archers, but it will always be more difficult than simply relying on skirmishers. This game is easier to complete if you rely on each faction's best units. Even when you first start the game with the Romans, you may try to rely on the town watch units, simply because you can have thousands of them without really breaking the bank. But the fact is that even during the mid-game, you're going to have a hard time beating the more specialised armies that drift your way if all you have are the town watch. Whereas relying on skirmishers will take you most way through the game because they are the most balanced and reliable units of that faction. In the last tip, I mentioned how the Julii faction should rely on skirmisher units, those who throw missiles and then attack. I'm just going to show you a few related battle tactics here. Having double rows is perfect with skirmishers because any break in the front lines will have the enemy suffer a face full of javelins from the second line. I lock formation and then I select behind the enemy. They move off and then I have them stop. I have fire at will selected, and even though my ranks are a little messy, look at what happens. The first lines take their shots and hold their general position, then the second lines start shooting off their javelins, and it doesn't take long before the enemy starts to panic and run away. Also, if you want your soldiers to attack with a melee attack, hold the Alt key and the icon will turn into a sword. Your soldiers will then run in and start fighting, even if they are archer or javelin units. It is at this point where most people would try to micromanage the fight, trying to run down the enemy and such, but really there's no need. Just select your units and toggle the switch to have them AI controlled. They will then defend themselves and perhaps even run after the enemy, so you don't have to worry too much about which units are overwhelmed and which are just standing there. Though, a word of warning, if you turn on AI control before the fight is truly won, it may give the enemy a chance to regroup. When should you use AI control on the battlefield? As with my last tip, a good time to use AI command is when the enemy has already mostly lost, in that you have won by a fair margin and you want to mop up the remaining soldiers without being worried about micromanaging the fight. As a veteran player, another good time to use AI command is when you have won the fight but you want to wander off to go to the toilet or check your phone while the battle finishes up, in which case let the AI do it for you. They won't put your general in danger unless he's already in danger when you turned on AI command. The only real problem is that, as you can see in this example, is that the AI plays very defensively. They arranged my troops all the way back here in preparation for a counterattack, whereas a human player would have quickly pushed forwards and pushed onwards, and the battle would have been won by now. Earlier, I suggested that you play to a faction's strengths. With that in mind, have your first few cities working towards getting the strongest units. This is an especially good idea if you are playing as one of the Roman factions. Work on the military line of the technology tree as early as possible so that you can build a robust army. This is because you are going to need to push out fairly early if you want to stay on the right side of the Roman Senate. You can disband multiple numbers of units by selecting them and then pressing the delete button. I've seen people online going over here and pressing the disband button, one after the other and after the other, but it's completely unnecessary. Disband all of the units at the same time using the delete button, and you can quickly and efficiently add all of those people to your population total. Pick a religious building for each of your different cities. If you want to know which suits you best, then open up the tech tree down here and hover over the endgame buildings to see what they offer. This faction has temples to Mars, and their endgame building offers 3 experience and 1 morale for every unit trained there. This means you could create a very powerful army. You could even create overpowered peasants if you wished. The first thing you should do after taking over a new town is to firstly repair its walls and then tear down their shrine or their religious building. You should then build the religious building or the religious temple from your faction. This will eradicate the culture penalty, which as a consequence will make Unrest a lot easier to manage. When you take over a new city, as mentioned in the last tip, the first thing you should do is repair the walls and to destroy their religious building. However, if you take a look at the rest of the buildings, several of them are also creating a culture penalty. Should you tear these down too? In many cases, no, not really. Once you build the next iteration of that building, it becomes one of yours, which removes the culture penalty. As you can see here, this market has a culture penalty. I am just about to finish upgrading it to a forum. One turn later, this is a forum and the culture penalty has gone. You can see here on the bottom, many of these buildings has a culture penalty, but on the tech tree it shows that I will still be able to upgrade all of them at some point. So in short, if you keep building, then your culture clash problem will eventually go away, except for religious buildings. Town Watch and archers are only really useful if you have bigger walls. If you want to keep a city without constantly spawning new high-ranking units, you need to build and maintain a safe and cheap garrison of units. Leaving peasants is fine, well, up until at least the first third of the game. After that, you need to rely on cheap but slightly more effective units. However, the Town Watch or their faction-related equivalent are pretty useless when defending your towns, as are the archers. That is, until you have very large walls, at which point you can start holding off up to mid-sized armies for quite a while. This gives you more chances to send back a larger army to defeat the invading one. Late game, I suggest that you automate almost everything. At a point where you have no money worries at all, I suggest you put everything on automate so that you can concentrate on conquest and on completing missions. Micromanaging a larger empire becomes very tedious very quickly. I discovered that the AI seems to believe that my cities that border with a different faction somehow need the most strongest and most expensive units. If you have just taken down a city in a faraway land, and reinforcements are going to take too long to arrive, you can harvest the city for cash and then leave. See here how this large enemy force is about to come over and retake the city. All I'm doing is selling off everything that can be sold, and then I'm leaving. Continue building units in the city location so that the enemy cannot simply walk over and take it. But even so, when the enemy succeeds, all they get in return is a city with almost no buildings in it. Just like in the old version of the game, catapults are overpowered because the enemy will just stand there and get blown up. See, you are too far away for it to prompt them to attack. It seems that even in the remastered version, the enemy AI still isn't smart enough to run over and attack, or even at least just to spread themselves out. Since I am not attacking walls or buildings, I'm using fire to inflict as much damage as possible on the enemy troops. Disappointingly, attacking the enemy gate with a catapult doesn't do anything. Even at 0% health, the gate is destroyed, but it doesn't stay open. However, if you use catapults against walls, then they will come down in a pile of rubble, leaving behind a big hole for your troops to enter. Though I must say that if you have very large walls in your city, the catapults will not fire outwards and over them, so keep that in mind if you are trying to defend a large city. As my last piece of advice, I'm going to say, learn to tolerate losing. See, what happens is you'll spend a lot of time building up a big army, spending lots of money, or a big city, and then the enemy comes along and they destroy your army, even though it seems that they really shouldn't, or they'll destroy your city, and it's really frustrating. So what you may do is load up a save and try again, or load up a previous save before that and try again, and you just discover that this city is lost, or this army is lost. So you may even consider loading one of the auto-saves from maybe 6 turns ago, but then it comes to a point where, well, you've forgotten what you did, and you've forgotten all the things you did between those turns, and it's going back too far, and you lose momentum. It kind of sucks. And that's one of the various points where many people they'll rage quit. They'll just say, well, I'm sick of this. I've just wasted all this time and I've lost it. In order to go the distance with this game, you're sort of going to have to learn how to tolerate losses. The people who have played the longest, they've learned that, losing a city, yeah, it sucks. But after a while, you've got so many cities, and sometimes it takes just a single diplomat to go back and bribe the city, and you've got it back again. But I would say one of the bigger reasons why people quit this game is simply because they have trouble tolerating a loss, especially when you've been, let's say, saving and loading in a way that means you never lose. In short, learn to tolerate the losses, and over time you'll find those losses become less frustrating, and you find that you can get a lot more out of the game.